Welcome to Goodfellas History. I'm one of your hosts, Garrett,
I'm Nick.
And I'm Davis.
and today I want to talk about the recent story of the Arkansas woman who is suing a trooper for flipping her SUV during a traffic stop. So I'm sure, a lot of you have heard about this, but let's just kind of go over it real quick. So an Arkansas woman who says she was injured when a state trooper deliberately bumped into her SUV, causing it to flip, or they call that a pit maneuver. And so she was going 84 miles an hour in a 70 mile per hour zone. So it makes sense why they stopped her in the first place, but it wasn't like super duper crazy. And so trooper puts on his lights, tries to pull her over. She slows down, like she gets into the right lane and she slows down, and eventually puts on like her hazard lights. And her reasoning is that she felt it was unsafe on the highway where they were at to pull over because the shoulder was very narrow and it was very dark. So she wanted to go to an exit, but to signal to the cop that she sees them, she went to the right, slowed down, and put on her hazards. Well, the cop, after 2 minutes, I think it was 2 minutes and 7 seconds, basically decided that a pit maneuver was the next course of action. Bumped the rear end of her car. She, spun out of control, and then her car actually flipped over. So she's also pregnant, which is also important to point out. So she ended up not sustaining, her and the baby both survived. For what it was, she came out relatively unharmed. And as the policeman, he calls for EMS, and as he's helping her out, he's basically kind of berating her, why didn't you stop? And she was like, it didn't feel safe. And she's like, well, and he's like, well, this is where we are now. And so, but while this story kind of was being thrown out there, I heard this phrase qualified immunity. And so I do want to kind of touch on that because it's pretty interesting, and I think I have heard people saying we need to end qualified immunity, and so I wanted to kind of research more about that. So basically, qualified immunity, it protects state and local officials, including law enforcement officers, from individual liability unless the official violated a clearly established constitutional right. So this kind of all first started back in 1871 when Congress adopted 42 U.S.C. subsection 1983, which makes government employees and officials personally liable for money damages. So basically, the individuals themselves first were held personally liable if they violated a person's federal constitutional right. And so, but even though that was a thing, few subsection 1983 lawsuits were successfully brought up. And so in 1982, the Supreme Court adopted the current test for the doctrine. Qualified immunity is generally available if the government official, sorry, I'm reading from this article and I don't think I'm pretty sure this is a typo, but anyway, basically, I think what it's trying to say is qualified immunity, it is not available if the violation isn't clearly established, if the constitutional violation isn't clearly established, and we'll kind of get into that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry about that. I was just reading that article, and I'm like, I don't think that's right, because the wording was kind of weird. Okay, so basically, they can't, how it's evolved now, the individual can't be held personally liable if qualified immunity applies. But if it doesn't apply, usually the government entity behind them will almost always pay out instead of the individual having to pay out.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is that qualified immunity helps protect state and local governments from having to pay money damages for actions that the courts have not deemed as unconstitutional. So, they're not being sued left and right, they're not having to pay out all this money, and things like that. think what's interesting though is that when I said the phrase clearly established, there has to be a precedent set for the specific type of situation that's occurred. And so, so according to the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court has held that police and correctional officers violate the Fourth Amendment when their use of force is excessive, but it does, like I said, it does require existing precedent. So I do have an example to kind of share with you guys, and then we can kind of discuss this.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I might be a little all over the place.
That's fine.
So in 2014, a 2014 Supreme Court held in Plymouth versus Rickard that police officers did not use excessive force in violation of the Fourth Amendment when they shot and killed the driver of a fleeing vehicle to end a dangerous car chase. The court also held that even if the officers used excessive force, so even if it was found that they used excessive force, they were still entitled to qualified immunity because it was not clearly established that shooting the drivers in these circumstances amounted to excessive force. So even if they did find that, there's no existing precedent to then say, oh yeah, in these specific circumstances, you're violating the Fourth Amendment due to excessive force. And so, yeah, that's kind of the background that I have for you guys. Nick, I know that you understand qualified immunity already, and so I'm wondering what your thoughts are about this.
So as a corrections officer, there were far more precedents put into place in potential violations of constitutional liberties and constitutional rights. Just because of the fact that prisons are a trap of all sorts of fun little bad things that happen. So, in reality, I don't know if this woman is going to win her case, just because of the precedents that's set with that car chase. All the cop has to say is that she did not comply within an orderly amount of time to pulling over, and he could make the claim that he felt like she was trying to escape, and thus, acted accordingly. Now, in the same time, one can also make the argument that what was the precedence of time for basically pulling people over? How much time needs to elapse between when you turn your lights on and when people pull over? Is there a set time?
No.
Who gets to decide what is safe? I mean, so for her to say, yeah, this was at night, it was busy, I was pulling over to basically, be safe with it. Nobody's happy about being pulled over by a cop. So did the cop have an expectation that she was, trying to escape? Well, no, because she was putting on her hazards, and she was slowing down. So what does that say? It says that she's recognizing that she's being pulled over. So this really strikes me as a case where if her lawyer's worth of, a ounce of salt, he'll say, well, then why did she turn on her hazards?
Yeah.
I mean, if there's a legitimate reason for her to behave the way she did, the cop's response and reaction was way overblown. Now, if the argument was that she was going 100 miles per hour off the freeway into the exit, there could be an argument that their use of force is necessary to protect other people for danger. The whole reason why cops are able to escalate force is that there needs to be a reason for it, and it needs to be a grounds of danger. So what I was taught in two different police academies, one for Idaho and one for Utah, is that the escalation of force needs to be based off of the circumstances that are presented. So it's not that I have to go through every step of the use of force. It's based entirely off of my assessment of the situation. But at the same time, I have to rationalize it in a report, because every single time I used force or anybody used force, they had a report on it. And this is just due to, covering your own ass, but it's also because you are technically violating somebody's constitutional rights every single time you use force. You need to have some kind of reasoning for that. It's not just because. It can't be just because you felt like it, or the guy was being a dickbag. So, in my experience, I think that this cop is probably going to be up shit creek, because this is a pregnant woman. What was the ethnicity of the woman?
She was white.
So she's white, pregnant, in a sedan. So she's a Karen. She probably was pissed off that she getting pulled over. But that officer did put her life and that child's life at risk for a speeding ticket.
Yeah, I don't know if it's, again, and I don't know if it's necessarily fair to say that she was a Karen, because her reasoning was, I wanted to pull over on an exit to make it a more safe.
I'm just saying that she's going 84 in a 70 zone.
Well, yeah.
I mean, and people do that, and the thing is I have to believe that there probably was something that probably caught the attention of the officer. So she may have been swerving through traffic. Who the hell knows? But the key thing here...
There is video, if anyone wants to watch it.
So, I mean, the key thing here, though, is what was the explanation for the use of force? What was the rationality? And if the cop says, well, I was worried that she was going to, try to escape and was driving into a slower area, anybody would be able to say, then why did she put on her hazards? And why was she decreasing her speed?
Yeah.
Why was she decelerating and putting on her hazards? She was indicating to you, she could easily indicating to you that she's working with you. Wouldn't it have been safer for everybody involved if she hadn't stopped just to notify the local PD, hey, this person with this license is, fleeing, heads up? Because then they'd been able to contain her in the neighborhood. What the cop did here was just, he was pissed off and impatient. And, the pit maneuver, what was his grounds? What was she doing? Was she swerving? Was she, driving erratically? I mean, the idea that, she was just going really fast and she wasn't stopping quick enough.
Yeah. I think the justification, because, again, she's telling her this as he's helping her out of her overturned vehicle, you need to stop. So she just didn't stop fast enough. I guess the expectation was, as soon as those lights come on, no matter what road you're on, no matter what, day, night, whatever, you just need to pull over and stop. But the issue is that I think part of the problem too is that in Arkansas, in their driver's manual for driver's ed or something along those lines, I don't have it pulled up in front of me, but it basically says an acceptable way to stop if you don't feel it's safe is you can pull over onto an exit, or you can pull over in a gas station where it's lit up, there's not cars zooming past you also going 70, or everyone speeds, so they're going 75. You know what I mean? And so
also take into consideration, I haven't watched the video, but if this was more of a rural environment, the fact that this is a 70 zone probably tells me this is probably closer to cities, or at least kind of more like what we have here in Salt Lake, where you have a bunch of a lot more traffic. But if this is in the driver's manual, this means there's a civil expectation of behavior. And at the same time, I really wanted to know what the policy for the Arkansas PD would be, or the Arkansas State Troopers would be, in a case like this. Because, if the dude's in violation of his policy, he's going to lose his job. So this is the real issue when it comes to something like this. If their policy is, if they're not stopping within 10 seconds, you're able to do a pit maneuver on them.
Yeah.
This just strikes me as, and I kind of want to know how much experience this guy has in the force as well. Because this strikes me as one or two people. This is an old grump that thinks he can get away with whatever. Or this is a new guy that is too big for his britches. You had to deal with people like this all the time. I had to deal with people like this all the time when I was in corrections. Because, if it's an old crusty dude that's just mad that this woman's not doing what he tells her to do right this minute, just got off the phone with his wife yelling at him for using the credit card or some stupid shit like that, I'm sorry. No, you're fucked. You have abused your power. You've damaged your own vehicle, because, doing a pit maneuver means that you're damaging your own police vehicle as well. You damaged a public vehicle, and it was all in the name of public safety, but you yet to... I think that the burden of evidence for, what was the excuse for the use of force, what was the evidence for use of force, is very, very, specious at best. Let me just put it this way. If I used this person's reasoning for, the inmate didn't follow my order, right now, so let me go up and tase him, I would be in the captain's office probably turning in my badge.
Yeah.
And it's just because like it's a clear escalation. Why put people at risk? Why put yourself at risk? Why put the inmate at risk? Why put people around you at risk for something like, oh, he didn't do exactly what I told him to do right this second? I mean,
Yeah.
and the inmate was running away, trying to escape. I mean, like there's uses of force, and so it also once again comes down to the officer. So this is where officers' discretion comes into play. I mean, we give these are public servants; they're magistrates of the state. They have executive power, and if they are using and abusing that power, they need to be held accountable. And we have
Yeah.
institutions in place that are supposedly supposed to be doing this. And so this is just an indication to me that, once again, policing as an institution is broken. Like if you think that this is okay behavior and treating people, and the reason why the cop, of course, is berating this woman is that, yeah, I think he realized the moment that the van went over that he was probably fucked. And so now it was just about, covering his tracks. When in reality, the best thing he could have done was just shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
Because at that point, I mean, like, a vehicle is possibly totaled, a pregnant woman was put in danger, she has some injuries, because just based on the speed and everything, thankfully no one was seriously injured, where, like, their lifelong threat was put into play. But, I mean, and this was all, and at the end of the day, what was the reason for this? Why would you put this person in danger? Why would you, what was the end goal here? Like, what was the purpose of this? I mean, like, if a guy has a gun and he's shooting into a crowd, you as a cop shooting back at him, let's say you shoot back at this person and you hit a person that wasn't involved and it wasn't a shooter, you're still held liable for that gunshot.
Yeah.
Because you are taking it into your power. I mean, this is the whole problem with this is, I think, as a society, we don't understand what cops are. Cops aren't soldiers. Cops are magistrates. They're not warriors. Their job is to keep the peace. And the concept of law and order is built upon that. But our legislative process and our legal system, the way policing is governed in our society, is basically kind of lost the plot when it comes to this. So now you have, like, cops doing shit like this. And it's abuse of power. This dude should lose his job and he should be held civilly liable for what he did. You mean? Like, this is not, a cop accidentally, pinched somebody when they're putting handcuffs on somebody, and now they potentially have nerve damage in the wrist. Something that can happen. Something that we were trained on. That's an accident. Still, they are held responsible to a certain level, but this was intentional. You can't say that you were pitting this woman on accident. You hit a sedan. It was a van, right?
It wasn't a van. It was. I'm not entirely sure.
But it's a bigger vehicle,
what the
right?
car was. It was an SUV.
So yeah, it's a van. It's an SUV.
It's bigger. A bigger vehicle.
So it's a bigger vehicle. They're prone to do things like that. He's in a cop car, pinning a van, when it's clear to him that there's a person in the vehicle. He's putting somebody's life in danger. Because whenever you have vehicle contact, you don't know, this person could have a medical condition. This person, you don't know the integrity of the vehicle. By pinning that vehicle against the wall, he could also lead to negative, consequences to other people who may be going off the exit as well, and the damages that could go with that. I mean, it strikes me as that what happened in this, and it's not armchair quarterbacking, is that this person made a critical decision to put somebody's life in danger, including their own. Because, I mean, this easily could have resulted in him flipping if he zigged when he should have zagged. So there's a lot of issues when it comes to this. I mean, this is... And unfortunately, in a lot of our police academies, this warrior cult bullshit mythos and mentality gets really impressed on people. And, it either people really embody it, become bitter because they never can, obtain it, or they become like with most people that I worked with, they just blew it off because they knew it was bullshit. Like, when I'm a correctional officer, most of the people that I'm dealing with are in better shape than I am because they have all day to work out. I'm not a really big guy. I'm like, 5'9", 5'10", I'm not going to beat anybody up. So my goal is with the inmates, and safely with law enforcement, with society, isn't to scare people or control people. Well, control to a certain extent. Or it's not to scare people. It's to keep the peace. The powers that I have and the situation or the society that I'm in control of, is based largely on the fact that people have to kind of have an agreement. That they understand that when a cop's around, or even if a cop's not around, there's a certain kind of behavior that's expected. And so, yeah, this lady was speeding, but I mean, I would want to ask, who else was probably speeding? What was the metric? Was 84 just outright? Was there anybody going faster? Was there anybody going slower?
Yeah.
I mean, if anybody else was going faster than, 70 miles per hour on there, I mean, like, is this something that speeding and a potential person fleeing, is that really worth, putting somebody's life in danger?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like she was fleeing an armed burglary of a gas station.
But I mean,
she was going... Sorry, you can go.
But I mean, it gets... but the thing is, that's presuming at that point. If you're a cop and somebody's fleeing, yeah, you're probably going to assume that they're involved in something. But unless you know 100% what they're doing, or you have corroborating evidence to that, there's really no excuse for this. This is... Yeah. For all you know, this could have been a senile 90-year-old woman who probably shouldn't be driving, probably warranted of a speeding ticket, but isn't wholly there. And so maybe you're not even aware that he's, trying to pull them over. Like, there's a lot of problems with this, right? And so this is one of the reasons why the probability immunity, the immunity was put into place was so that it would allow cops to act, but also would allow them to be held responsible if they basically broke the law or broke the spirit of the law or abused their power.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've been pretty... Yeah, I was going to say, so I've been pretty quiet on this just because I was not actually aware of this, case. I wasn't aware of a lot of this, like qualified immunity and whatnot. I really just wanted to kind of learn and gather before I voice my thoughts on this. Because there's no precedence for it, I think this is extra important to look at all the context of it, so we can then set precedents, and then we can judge from there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I guess how I'm looking at it is, we know that there were signs that the woman driving gave signs to the officer of, hey, I'm trying to comply, I'm slowing down, I'm getting to the far right lane, I'm putting my hazards on. Those should have been indicators for the officer to be okay, I know they see me, I know what's happening here, there's no need to escalate. And so because of that, I do feel like the officer should be held accountable for that. I feel like qualified immunity with precedents being set and whatnot, honestly, isn't that bad. Hearing that, it could lead to an abuse of power, but as long as we get context, as long as we get precedents set and whatnot, I feel like we can then start operating from that afterwards, if that makes sense. So we know all the context of this story. We know what's going on. Proceed with that.
So this is part of the whole thing of defund the police versus rebuild the police. Mm-hmm. So I'm of the mindset that our policing system's broken. And it's broken largely due to the fact that cops have been turned, or policing has been turned into kind of the social, school nurse, right? Everybody who has any kind of problem goes to the school nurse. Well, most school nurses probably do have a pretty good understanding of medical care. That's not their job. You need to have counselors, you need to have other people that are involved in the process. And so what has happened, if you look at our legislation, is we basically have passed laws and legislation that naturally violate people's 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment rights. I mean, let's look at the Patriot Act, various other laws that have been implemented since 9/11, but even since before 9/11, like the drug law that Joe Biden and Bill Clinton and everybody is kind of known for from the Democratic Party, have basically restructured policing in this country in a really negative way. Now, we could say this began really with Nixon, which is true. It began with Nixon, it was expanded under Reagan and George Walker Bush, and then it was put on steroids by Bill Clinton, and then another round of steroids with 9/11. So we see this systemic issue of policing changing from a civic-minded magisterial position to a militant warrior or faux warrior position in our society. And this has happened over multiple generations. So now policing's broken. There are cops that are now in positions of power that are basically in this warrior mindset that, we have to be the biggest dickus around. And
yeah, I'm a wolf among sheep.
Yeah, that bullshit. Like, I remember, like, I'll tell you guys right now, yeah, we got that in the academy. And it's like, this is stupid. We're not wolves among sheep. We're the sheep too. Like 2 seconds ago, we were flipping sheep. What are we now, baptized as wolves? I mean, anybody who okay, this is a bit of a tangent. Anybody who uses the term sheeple should have a forced vasectomy so that they can't reproduce.
It's annoying as hell.
Because it's assuming that you are the only rational... Like, if you ever feel like you're the only rational person in an insane world, you really need to take a step back and really analyze your position. Because that's usually not a good place to be. Because it generally means either you really don't know what's happening, so maybe slow your roll, or it means that people just aren't aware of what you're trying to... You're not selling it right. You're not pitching it right. So, anyway, getting back from that tangent, I am not necessarily interested in the slogan defund the police. I'm interested in the slogan of rebuild the police. Because it's clear that policing is broken. And in order to fix something that's broken, oftentimes you got to rebuild it. So how are we going to rebuild our police? How are we going to restructure law enforcement in our society so it's less repressive, less militant, and where we can actually say as a society that we're basically retrieving our rights back? That there's been a clear breach of our civil liberties and our civil rights as a society. And, all well-meaning intent, I think that a lot of this can be extrapolated to well-meaning people trying to do what they think is right at the time. But, like what Edmund Brooks said, greater the power, greater the abuse.
Yeah.
And this falls into something that I think is very important that we kind of forget about a lot, and that's like optics in social movements and whatnot. I feel like a lot of the time we know there's issues, we know we want to address them in certain ways, and in that a lot of the time we forget how it looks to people not involved in our circles. We need to remember when we're trying to encourage big social changes, yeah, we agree with everyone in our circles, but people that don't agree with us, if they hear big dramatic words like defund or like destroy the police, institutions and whatnot, they're going to be turned off by that. Just because they don't understand all the context behind it, you have to approach it in a way that society is going to be more open to and receptive with it.
Yeah, it can't be just an N-word. Like if it's like coded language. Like if it's an inside or an inside talking point for a group, I think people naturally kind of form bubbles when it comes to kind of this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So just taking an understanding that when I use the word rebuild police, I'm also including the cops. Because they're the ones that are going to live with it, right? They're the ones that are going to be going through with it. And so, with the George Floyd riots and just the BLM movement in general, BLM has been demonized nonstop by various outlets. And unfortunately, I think that, your lay BLM activist is a rational, pragmatic thinker. But defund the police got really popular inside those circles. And a lot of people jumped on board with that. And before anybody really took the time to really analyze the consequence of saying something like that, it got out, as it does, because the right wing loves, picking apart and finding things like this to kind of create wedge issues. But I think Rebuild the Police is a far more inclusive narrative because it means the same thing. Our policing system is broken. It's not working. Cops are... what we call the good cops, or just people just doing their jobs, are constantly being forced into, there's ticket quotas, for Christ's sake. You talk to any street cop, they have ticket quotas. They got to give out X number of speeding tickets in a month. Like, this is why at the beginning and the end of the month, usually you have, like, more speeding tickets being issued. You see more cops on the road. I mean, that's silly. The whole purpose of that is to kind of force police presence. But it kind of defeats the purpose, too, because the goal is...
Yeah, this is one of the biggest issues I have with that, is that we are almost incentivizing, like, punishment and, like, crackdowns when you do things like that. Like, you need to bring X number of, like, blanks in. You need to find X number of this. You're basically incentivizing, like, if you don't do this, you're not up to, like, par. But if you're... the whole point is to try and reduce crime, not...
Well, the thing also gets into, like, cops make decent money, but they don't make great money for what they do. I mean, this is not the most dangerous job in the world, but it's a really flippin' difficult one. I mean, I tell people, when you say all cops are bad, all cops are shit, you forget that, a cop is more likely to come up to a scene with a bunch of teenagers dead after drinking and driving and, seeing the carnage from that than they are to ever pull their firearm. So this is a job that takes a psychological toll on people. And when I say rebuild policing, I mean we need to have people that are able to handle that in law enforcement. We need to have people that are fully capable of knowing that if they open up about their experiences, that they have the mental fortitude to handle shit like that. Because I mean, like, I've seen and witnessed shit that
I'm sure.
I have my issues. I mean, I have PTSD. I take medication for it. And like I've never had like experience quite just like that. So I mean, being aware of that and understanding that the job has its own toll on people is really important. So the goal shouldn't be about demonizing police. I mean, getting back to the late great Michael Brooks, I mean, be hard on institutions and soft on people. So the institution of policing is broken. We need to be hard on it. We need to rebuild it. We need to restructure it. There needs to be a change. But the police officers themselves, for every shithead, dickhead like this officer seems to be in this case, there are probably many more officers who, institutionally speaking, can't speak out against this guy, because if they do, they're a rat. They're a betrayer. Some ways of rebuilding this is breaking those social bonds, breaking those social structures, and that it gives people wiggle room to basically call out coworkers for being dipshits. Because this puts all cops' lives in danger. I mean, it really does. Like, if you are only seen as an oppressive force, I mean, it's like with flipping Ferguson. Like, the Ferguson PD, most of the cops didn't live in Ferguson. You're an occupational force at that point. Like, that's not compatible. Policing can't function that way. If you don't have the trust and commitment of the community with you, you might as well just be in Humvees patrolling with machine guns.
Well, not even that, but if you're not involved with the community, you're not understanding, like, the day-to-day struggles, you're not understanding the people and, like, how they operate in their, like, lives as well. Like, it just, it's an external force coming in at that point and just punching down.
Mm-hmm. Now, this gets into the bigger issue of that's what cops are for. So, I don't believe that, and I don't want that. But let's understand, there's a political party in this country that see cops as exactly that. And I think I think you guys know what I'm talking about.
Oh, absolutely.
So, there's a reason why I say it began with Nixon, got expanded on Reagan and George Herbert Bush. Bill Clinton was a damnable fool and went along with it, but if he didn't go along with it, then there may have been even bigger consequences of Republicans pushing even harder legislation through Congress. But 9/11 then happened as well. So, what's the commonality of this? It's the flippin' Republican Party. Republicans, for whatever reason, the Republican Party were able to sell themselves as a law and order party, despite the fact that most of their presidents have been kind of criminals, or have been involved in kind of some shady dealings. I mean, getting a blowjob in the White House, I don't think really strikes me as that big of a deal, or a criminal act.
Yeah, I was going to say, in comparison to some of the things we've seen from the White House, yeah. I absolutely agree.
I would say...
I mean, there is that power dynamic, but yeah, for sure.
Well, I mean, Nixon, you had Watergate. Reagan, you had Iran-Contra. George Herbert Walker Bush lied us into Iraq the first time with clearly faulty information. GW lied about a lot of shit. And then we got Trump.
Yep.
And so I think this kind of feeds into the narrative that I'll be talking about later when it comes to ideals versus ideology later on.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, let's really understand there is a political faction in this country that see police as their own private militia to keep certain segments of undesirables down.
Almost just weapons of the state.
Pretty much. And unfortunately, there are cops that are more than happy to see themselves that way. So this is the kind of danger that we're dealing with. So this is why I'm really happy that BLM happened. I mean, this is why I want to see BLM move forward, because I think BLM has in it a momentum that if we are wise, we can attach ourselves to help shape a broader momentum, a national leftist push for reforms that are necessary in our country. Any closing arguments, guys?
As I said, I think just in this, when we're trying to set precedents, getting back to what we were talking about earlier, context is always going to be key. Try and get as much as we can out of every story we can so we can set better rules, better regulations, and move on from there.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do agree with the optics thing. I don't... But at the same time, I think that, you know, a lot of people are angry, and it's my hope that after the Derek Chauvin thing, maybe we can see a little bit less anger now that because I think a big part of the problem is just accountability, and when no one's being held accountable, it's, you know, people are just pissed off, and it's, you know, telling people who are pissed off, well, don't say it like that. I don't know, but at the same time, I feel like after the Derek Chauvin thing, at least personally, I have seen maybe a little bit less of that. So I think if we can continue down this road where when police do bad shit and they're held accountable, we can have a better, more optic-friendly sort of, you know, movement and people who want to kind of participate in that way, if that makes sense.
It does. And like with my own experience, like if people don't get burnt with their bad behavior, oftentimes it escalates. So guys that start out with just like being shitheads with inmates often begin to do more aggressive things. And so if they're not called out or held responsible for their behavior, oftentimes they tend to do pretty ridiculous and heinous shit. And unfortunately, oftentimes it's not them that pay the price. It's the next officer that the inmate deals with. And the same thing happens here when it comes to the streets. So I agree with Garrett. Like, you know, if there has been injustice in our society, and people have a right to be pissed off. And so with me framing the rebuild versus reform, or I mean not reform or defund, I think it's just purely optics. But I understand why people are pissed off, and they have every right to be pissed off, particularly the African American community in our country. So this is not me telling BLM what to do. It's just me pitching a point that I think it sells the same argument that this is broken, but we need to rebuild it because we need some kind of institution of policing in our society.
Yeah.
Well,
I do think even just one final thing. I do think that even with amongst the anger, I do think most people understand that the need for that. So I do think when it comes to like abolish the police, that is a very small minority, and I think that's just important to keep it in mind. Sorry.
That's fine. Well, this has been Goodfellas History. If you like the show, please like and subscribe and comment down below.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.